ובאו ציון ומירה, ובשמחת עולם, בשמחת עולם, בשמחת עולם על ראשם צעצון, בשמחה, צעצון, בשמחה יציבו ונעשו יגון בנחה, אוי צעצון, בשמחה, צעצון, בשמחה יציבו בשמחת עולם, בשמחת עולם, בשמחת עולם ובדויה השם ישובו ובאו ציון ומירה בשמחת עולם, בשמחת עולם ראשם ששון, בשמחה, ששון, בשמחה יפילו ושבו בנים לכולם, ושבו בנים, ושבו בנים, ושבו בנים לכולם, ושבו בנים, בנים לכולם, ושבו בנים, ושבו בנים, ושבו בנים לכולם, ושבו בנים, ושבו בנים, ושבו בנים, ושבו בנים בגבולה, בעזרת השם לכל המקומות הקדושים, ושבו בנים בגבולה, אוי אוי ושבו בנים בגבולה, אוי אוי ושבו בנים, ושבו בנים, ושבו בנים בגבולה, איזה שמחה! ושבו בנים, ושבו בנים, ושבו בנים בגבולה.
טוב רבותיי, לכבוד לשבת, יש פה ברכת שהחיינו בשם ומלכות, מכוונים בשם כולם.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם שהחיינו וקיימנו והגיענו לזמן הזה.
השם חסדו ונפנה אותם לבני אדם, יודו לשם חסדו, יודו לשם חסדו, יודו לשם חסדו ונפנה אותם לבני אדם, כי הצביעה נפש שוקקה ונפש רעבה בבקשה להתיישב בכיסאות.
חברים אהובים, אנחנו מגיעים לשיא הערב, לשיא היום. אנחנו מודים להשם יתברך על הזכות הזאת שיהונתן פולארד איתנו פה, ואנחנו ממש מתרגשים לעשות את הסיום השכל שלמדנו ביחד כולם לעילוי נשמת אשתו, ואנחנו רוצים לשמוע דברים מפיו וביחד להתחזק ביחד בתוך כלי הדברים של יהונתן. אנחנו נזכה גם שהרב הראשי לישראל, הרב דוד לאו שליט"א, יגיע, וביחד עם יהונתן ועם הרב הראשי לישראל נזכה לעשות את סיום השכל, ובעזרת השם להתחזק ביחד למען שמו באהבה. יהונתן, תודה רבה. תודה רבה על הזכות יהונתן, תודה רבה וברוך הבא, ובבקשה. שימו לב למסך, יש תרגום על כל מה שיהונתן מדבר באנגלית, יש תרגום מילה במילה.
שלום חברים. On behalf of myself and Esther, Shalom, I'd like to thank you all for this opportunity to meet you and to talk to you. My first impression after seeing you men is I feel very sorry for our enemies. Very sorry. You represent the best that we have in this country, and you should never forget that. You're our elite, you're our vanguard, you're everything that we were meant to be by Hashem. Fearless Jewish soldiers defending our land. So kol hakavod. When Esther would address soldiers, and you are soldiers right now, she would always start off by asking them, who are you? Many of them didn't know exactly what she meant by that. You know, they have a name. She would tell them that who you are is a Jewish warrior. And you have the blood of every Jewish warrior and war leader coursing through your veins. Whether it's Avraham Avinu, and he was a great soldier, we have to remember that, or Yeshua ben Nun.
The chief rabbi just came, so we're just going to welcome him in.
Okay.
סליחה ליהונתן, זכות גדולה, הרב הראשי לישראל, רבותיי, לעמוד. שאו שהערים ראשך פתחי עולם ויבוא ויבוא. שאו שהערים ראשך וינשאו. היום מי עושה מלך הכבוד.
הוא מלך הכבוד צילה, ומי הוא זה מלך הכבוד? השם צבאות הוא מלך, השם צבאות הוא מלך, הוא מלך הכבוד צילה. עליהם מלך תוסיף שלותם כמון ומדור. ימים עליהם מלך תוסיף שלותם כמון ומדור. ימים עליהם מלך תוסיף שלותם כמון ומדור.
שנותם כמו דום אדום ימים אני במלך תוסיף ימים אני במלך תוסיף שנותם כמו דום אדום ימים אני ימים אני במלך תוסיף שנותם כמו דום אדום חזקים ומחים לשבת
Chaverim, kavod harav ma'alav. So this is a second great honor for me to be here, to be with my friend, kavod harav Lau. So she would, as I was saying, she would tell these soldiers that they have the blood of every warrior, Jewish warrior in their veins, starting with Avram Avinu, to Yehoshua ben Nun, even Moshe Rabbeinu, all the way up. Gidon, David HaMelech, Shaul HaMelech, all the way up, Chizkiyahu HaMelech, Yoshia HaMelech, Yoshua HaMelech, all of them. And she told them, you should never forget that, ever. She would also tell them that the main reason they're wearing a uniform is to perform the mitzvah of defending this land. And she would emphasize that it was a mitzvah after 2,000 years that we now have an army and the capability of instilling fear in our enemies. It's something we should never show because we're defending our land, al-Kiddush Hashem. So she emphasized no fear. You fear only Hashem, not man. And certainly not our enemies. And after what I saw here tonight, as I said, I'm sorry for it, just a little bit. Not much, just a little bit. I'd like to just relate a story about what happens to an officer in captivity when given the opportunity to come home or to leave prison. And God forbid, you men should face this situation. But if it's in your power, remember what I'm going to tell you right now, please. There was a moment when prisoners, Arab prisoners, Palestinian prisoners were going to be released. It's called one of the fourth Pi'imah. And these were some very bad people. They had a lot of blood on their hands. But the Americans decided, for a confidence-building gesture, we should release them. And in exchange, we would get me. Except I wouldn't be allowed to come home. I would have to stay in Chutz La'aretz forever. So Esther called me in prison and said, what's your decision? You want to become free, or you want to stay in prison? And I said, well, I can give you my short answer, which is no. And she said, well, what's your long answer? And I said, hell no. So she said, okay, as an officer, what's your assessment of the situation? And I said, well, if we release these animals, and that's what they are, they're animals, I said we would be devaluing the life of their victims, our brothers and sisters. Second of all, we would be undermining deterrence because the next murderer would think, well, I'm going to get out. I'm going to be released, no matter what I do. And the third reason is it would impose in terrible pain on the victims' families, inflict terrible pain on them. So I said, for all three reasons, my answer is no. And she said, well, that's a very fine military assessment. But she said, it's not a Jewish assessment. So Esther was my morah. So I listened very carefully to what she said next. And what she said was, if you agree to this, you will be committing the same sin as the Meraglim, who cursed the land out of self-interest. They didn't want our people entering the land because of fear of what would happen to them. They would lose their status. So she said, if you agree to this, you're saying not just to the people of Israel, but to Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that you value Galut more than you do Eretz HaKodesh. She said, your responsibility as a Jewish officer is always to remember that what we fight for. And what is that? We fight for Am Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael, Al Pi Torat Yisrael. And she said, if you come home in a body bag as a met, to be buried in Kever Yisrael, or you come home as a broken old man, capable only of kneeling and kissing the ground, she said, that's the Jewish way of handling this situation. I said, oh, okay, now I know. And that was my official explanation as to why I couldn't participate in this Chilul Hashem. And as a soldier, this is what we fight for. We fight for Am Yisrael, Eretz Yisrael, Al Pi Torat Yisrael. And that's why we never show fear to the enemy, because we're fighting for what God gave us. Esther proved one thing in her death. And what was that? When she died, and they called the time of death, she had no pulse, she had no brain function, she had no heart function, she had nothing. It was all straight lines on the machines. She woke up, or her neshama woke up, and told me the following in front of witnesses, so I didn't imagine this. She said, my neshama volunteered to come back to do two missions. One was to bring you home, a Jewish soldier, home, the right way, and to bring you home as a Jew, not a goy. And she said, the easiest part was bringing you home, which came as a surprise to me. And she said the hardest thing, it took 30 years of her work to bring me home as a Jew, a complete Jew, and not a goy. And she said it's easy to take the Jew out of Galut, to bring him home to Eretz HaKodesh, but it's very, very hard to take the Galut out of the Jew. So she said, Baruch Hashem, I've completed both my missions, and now I can go home. And she died. Well, the neshama left. So what did she leave us? She left us, all of us here, and as soldiers, you better remember this. She left us with the fact that we have a neshama, which means there is Shamayim. And we have to be sure that when we go before the Kisei HaKavod, that we've lived a good Jewish life, full of mitzvot and achdut and mitzvot. So as soldiers, you never know when something bad could happen. But you should know in your heart that you have a neshama, and that if, God forbid, you die al Kiddush Hashem, you're going straight to Shamayim, where you'll serve in His army for the next big battle coming up. There's a book that was given to me, and I'm going to give all of you copies of it, and I hope you carry it into battle. It's this book, which is out of print. I had 500 copies made for you men, because I think it will help you. Certainly as an officer, it opened my eyes up. This book is called 222. 222 days in 1948 that 30, maybe 40 men and women dug in and defended Kfar Darom against the entire Egyptian army. I want you to think about that. 30 to 40 men and women with rifles, small arms. And they fought for 222 days against everything that the Egyptians could throw at them. And when they were asked repeatedly to evacuate, their answer was, no, you come to us. You help us, because we're defending Eretz HaKodesh and we don't retreat. The lessons of this book will carry you through life. And I'm sorry to say that many officers, high-ranking officers that I've talked to, know nothing about either this book or the battle. So when you read this book, remember, you could be any one of those 35 or 40 men or women that were fighting at Kfar Darom. And they were truly fighting Al Kiddush Hashem. And they showed absolutely no fear to the enemy. Overwhelming force against them. Tanks, airplanes, artillery, you name it, was thrown at them. There was no hill or fortification, nothing. The only thing they had was this. And they made it. Unfortunately, they had to be evacuated eventually, but they held the Egyptian army long enough for the Haganah and the Palmach and the Irgun and Lehi to join into Tzachar. I can't say how proud I am of all of you, because you're our future. You're defending our future. The last thing Esther did before she went into the hospital was we went up to Ramat HaGolan. And some people wanted me to see some things up there. So we were right on the border of Syria and Lebanon. And I had to carry her up there because she couldn't walk by this time. But it was very important that she tell me something up there. So it's beautiful. And we had a lot of security escorts with their rifles looking because we're exposed. And she said to me, "What do you see?" I said, "Well, I see Hezbollah, and I see Hezbollah, Lebanon and Syria." And she said, "Look further. Look further. As far as you can see, what do you see?" And I said, "More Hezbollah, a lot more." And she said, "No, that's not what you're looking at." And the soldiers we were with, they were all religious soldiers, including the Aluf. And they were interested in what she had to say at this point. And she said, "What you see is Eretz HaTzvi. This is what we're fighting for with the Geula, as far as you can see." So it's my hope and prayer that we all be zocher to actually see the vision in real life that she saw in our lifetime.